what affects trust in digital services and the providers of digital services like government or private institutions? I will hand you this microphone.
Thank you so much, Vicky. I think that's a question with multiple angles. I would want to start answering the question first from the government perspective, and then I'll go on to the private sector. But trust is one of those elements that is very vital to driving the kind of digital uptake that we need to see that drives prosperity in the digital economy. A lot of the times, the trust in that sphere is usually driven by openness. Openness to what, for example, my data is going to be used for, if what you're saying is going to be done to protect my data, is actually done to protect my data. It's also in access, for example. So trust can be broken in context of government when by means of trying to control citizenry and the voices of citizens, we find that trust is constantly broken with partial or complete blockage of access to the internet by governments across Africa and different parts of the world. So that can also impact trust levels or quotient, because again, openness is quite a very strong element of gaining that trust in the ecosystem. And then the other angle of things would be, generally speaking, anyone who collects data, anyone who processes data has responsibility towards safeguarding that data. So again, data security is never, or cybersecurity generally speaking, is never 100%, guaranteed. But trust, can be lost or gained when we see that as a data, as a person who collects data, you are not doing, you're not putting in place the data security standards and the data security measures that needs to be put in place to protect the data you collect. So from the perspective of the private sector and government as well, this can be an element to drive trust trust from citizens or to lose it. But the bottom line of this, of what I want to add, is that we need trust for all kinds of all elements of digital economy to prosper. From e-commerce, for example, the reason you're able to put your card on a website and make a purchase is because you trust that your card is going to be secured. The reason you're able to use a ride-hailing service is you're sure that when you get in the cab, you won't disappear. So trust is quite a fundamental element to consuming just about any digital service, and we need to all, contribute to ensure that that's preserved.
Thanks so much, Confidence. I just want to check. I think our online guests are with us. Can I just see if Anna is on the line?
Hi, Vicky. I hope you guys can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. Anna, I wonder if you wanted to kind of say some of your opening remarks, and we just covered off the first question. So perhaps if I hand to you, Anna, to introduce yourself and kind of kick us off properly.
Okay, thank you so much, and apologies for the delay. I've been sitting here in South Africa sweating to get on. But yeah, so thank you very much, Vicky, and thank you to the African IGF for organizing this important event. I guess building trust in digital services beyond the technology is the key topic for our panel discussion today. And Vicky, I suppose you've already done the introduction of each of the panelists, so would you like me to do that?
No, we've introduced everybody apart from Varsha, who we just need to double check is also online. Varsha, are you there?
Yes, I am. Thank you very much, Vicky. And I do apologize. It seems as if I had another link and I was sitting on another panel, but I'm here. Thank you.
Great. Nice to see you, Varsha. So Anna, perhaps if you could just introduce Varsha and then we can go straight into the questions.
Yes, lovely to see you, Varsha. So Varsha Sulal is a privacy and tech attorney who started her career in private practice and then served with the Public Protector of South Africa Varsha served as the Executive and Deputy Information Officer with the Information Regulator here in South Africa, and currently is the Executive Legal and Deputy Information Officer at the Railway Safety Regulator. She's a doctoral candidate in ICT law, privacy and cybersecurity, and also a cyber resilience digital access program trainer. A fun fact about Varsha, which I saw on her Twitter account, is that she is an earth warrior and passionate about ensuring girls have equal opportunities in ICT. So some of the introductions that are planned for each of you was we all had fun facts. Obviously, the proper bios can be read up on LinkedIn, but I always like to share something that other people may not know. And if there is a minute, I would like to still do that. So confidence, your fun fact was actually really funny. You can move your eyes in all sorts of directions. But I think the fun fact that I'd like to share about confidence is that I've met her so many times over the last 2-3 years virtually that I feel like she's, you know, like a close friend already, even though I haven't met you in person yet, but your light just shines so brightly across virtual technology as well. So another fun fact about Dr. Catherine Gatao, which is such an honor to meet you, is that Dr. Gatao is dubbed as an ICT elder in Kenya in recognition of 40 years of service in the private sector, academia, diplomacy, as well as senior government appointments, which is really impressive, but she definitely doesn't look like an elder. The other fun fact we had about Victoria, also really impressive. Vicky's done a lot in, you know, since 2020 when she joined, you know, when she moved to Pretoria to lead the UK government cyber engagement. She's done a lot in building our local cybersecurity capacity. So thank you very much. But as a child, Vicky was a UK national champion in Latin American dancing, which is really impressive. And then last but not least, Benga Shajan, wow, I mean, your bio was also so impressive. The fun fact that you shared with me was that you touched and took crocodiles without being eaten. So you survived it. Yeah, so the things that from my point of view that I really find interesting when I speak with my international peers in the cybersecurity is that they're often surprised by the opportunities we have on the continent. The fact that our average age is 19 years old, that we have over 400 companies on the continent that have more than $1 billion of annual revenue, and they're actually growing faster than a lot of the other companies elsewhere. That we have, you know, this massive youth that is demanding access to connectivity, that is driving technology and digitization, but with that obviously come risks as well. And I think one of them is obviously the growing number of those mobile device consumers, many of which are first-time users, and the fact that they lack basic cyber literacy skills. We run a survey every year across 8 different African countries, and it uncovered, the last one was now in December 2021, and it uncovers that the pandemic definitely had an impact in the way people are working, and it will continue to have an impact. And the fact that 72% of the respondents, so quite a large proportion, were concerned about cybercrime, but they also at the same time lacked a basic understanding of what is cybercrime really and some of the most basic threats out there. For example, more than half of them didn't know what a ransomware attack was. So yeah, I guess like that's why we're here today, and I'm really excited to hear your views, what we can do together in a collaborative fashion to address those challenges. But what I really love about African innovators is that they're often driven by like a deeper purpose. You know, we look at Africa's challenges, such the gaps in infrastructure, education, etc. And we see a human issue that we feel responsible for solving. So ensuring digital inclusion and addressing the cybersecurity skills gap, as well as sort of the lack of awareness, is definitely one of those human issues that we need to solve. And yeah, I'm interested to hear what our esteemed panelists have got to share on what we can do together to solve this. So I believe that, you know, confidence, I heard your response to how do citizens trust digital services. I'm not sure if we've already heard from Dr. Gatao. Would you mind maybe sharing your view on this from an East African perspective.
Okay, thank you very, very much, Anna, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, so I'm not sure I can represent East Africa because even though I'm dubbing myself an elder, I'm actually not a government official or anything of any kind, so I'll just generally give my own views from the long experience. Now, one of the things I used to repeat when I was a government official was that the digital economy is a trust economy. The nature of the technology and the way that we interact with it means that the traditional means of trust are not readily available in that space. Now, I see three types of traditional trust. The first is the relational. That's hard for me to say coming from where I do, where we are unable to differentiate between R and L. So relational trust, meaning that through experience, through meeting, through understanding who we are and who the other person is, we trust them. And this was really in operation in the natural world where the kiosk owner or the shop owner who knows you, you can just tell them, okay, I won't pay you today, I can just pay you tomorrow, and they trust you. Then there's trust by protocol, where, for example, I think I read historically, I wasn't good at history, but that the reason why people used to shake hands was to demonstrate that they didn't have a weapon in their hand, and therefore you could trust them not to kill you. So they were coming in a friendly way. And I'm sure we have all kinds of trust protocols in any culture. Of course, the cyberspace is cross-cultural, so our trust protocols may not work across the board, but I'm glad to say that we're building new protocols of trust. The third area is trust by quality. So especially in the corporate world, we know the brands, and the brand gives us a certain expectation of the nature of the product or service that we are consuming, and we can trust that brand to be upheld. Now these days I'm very careful, so I won't use any brand as an example, but I hope that I'm communicating clearly. Now if I think of Kenya, and I won't say East Africa because things are not the same across the board. I know not only other East Africans, but also people around the world are very surprised when they hear that, the vast majority of Kenyans transact mobile money several times a day. And they wonder how they trust that just by tapping a few things on your phone, large sums. In these days, it's up to, I think, around $3,000 US, which people transact this way. And they trust that the transaction has gone through and there are no problems. And now they're doing many other things, borrowing money, betting, and doing all the kinds of quite amazing things. And I'd ask, how has this trust? Now, this is almost a relational trust because the traditional application worked over time, and we were able to see it working for many people. And in that way, people almost have a relationship with the technology. Now, trust can be eroded. So recently I had a relative who got a really bad social engineering scam. And one of the things she told me after that is, I no longer trust this technology. So we can't stop there. We must build the trust by protocol and trust by quality on top of the relational trust that has been built by example. Now, used to be a lecturer in my long history, so I don't want to start lecturing. So I'll stop there. And I'm very keen to hear from other panelists.
Thank you, Dr. Gatau. That was really insightful. I'd like to hear as well from a maybe more West African point of view. Let's just go over to Benga. Benga, right? I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies if not. What is your view in terms of trust? And maybe you could also expand on what types of threats are we faced with, and or what are consumers or people faced with that could erode the trust, especially, we just heard from Dr. Gatau, the social engineering attack, making people wary of using mobile payments or mobile devices for financial transactions.
All right, thanks. So maybe I should start with the irony in the fact that when you asked earlier question about trust of government and trust of private sector, given that governments are politically elected and sort of have legitimacy to oversee certain areas and influence our lives, you would naturally expect that there should be more trust in government. But the numbers don't lie. What the numbers say is the exact opposite. For those of us who follow the numbers so there are 5.4 billion searches on Google a day, but that doesn't really represent numbers of citizens who use it. Maybe a more accurate representation would be Facebook. Active users every month, that's like 1.96 billion people. There are digital services that governments want people to opt in for. And I don't know, at least so we do an annual report at Paradigm Initiative on African countries, I don't know any country that has had huge success with citizens signing on to either digital ID programs without threats. Typically what you hear is, if you don't sign on to this digital ID, you won't be able to get a new passport, you won't be able to transact financially, and so people have to do it. So clearly, even though trust is literally the bedrock of the digital economy, it is completely missing in many cases between citizens and governments. In some cases, it is missing between citizens and the private sector. I can give a few examples. So when there are, say, data leaks on certain platforms, and people find out about that, recently there was this whole conversation about Facebook exit, cancel your Facebook account and things like that. Typically, it doesn't work like that, because if there's an alternative platform that provides exactly the same service, it becomes much easier. A very simple example is not so many people trust Google with all of their data when they know how much data is being collected. In fact, many people don't even know how much data is being collected by many of those platforms. So when I teach digital security, for example, I show people history.google.com what data is available to Google that is being collected just because they have a mobile phone that is connected to Google. And more often than not, people are like, oh my God, I shouldn't be using this because this is too much information. Everywhere I've been, everything I've done, locations and things like that. But because they need that service. So at times, trust is not absolute. It's not because I trust you with my data. It's transactional. It's that if I put in my data, you will take me from one point to the other point. And that is, what's relevant in the private sector. To the second part of the question, in terms of what sort of turns people off from trust, I think in terms of digital services, I already mentioned that when there are leaks, when, for example, you have violence online, say gender-based violence and things like that, that obviously keeps you away from using the services. But on the other hand, when it comes to governments, one thing that clearly erodes trust, and I say this because just last week, a few organizations took the Nigerian government to court for shutting down Twitter in the country. And yay, good news, we won. And the question is not what has happened in Nigeria alone. The same thing with Togo. Togo shut down the internet. Citizens went to court and won. Ideally, you should not, as a citizen, have to ask for such things to be done. You trust that when I need access to digital services, I shouldn't struggle to get it. And so those are some of the things that, of course, discourage people from having trust, either in platforms or in governments. And when we continue the conversation, we'll say a bit more about the cost of such actions to the digital economy at large, because almost every country has a digital economy plan, but when you look at it in terms of policies and in terms of practices, many of those countries that have digital economy plans also erode trust because of the actions of government as perceived by citizens. I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Benga, and thanks for bringing up the example with trust being eroded by online, gender-based violence, for example, which leads me to Varsha, a question for you from a probably legislative point of view. There was a report that came out. It's probably 2 years old now, but it hasn't changed much in terms of the actual ratios. But the proportion of women currently using the internet, according to the ITU report, in Africa is a quarter less than the proportion of men. And according to additional research by Policy, they said that 39% of African girls were concerned or very concerned about their online safety, and they have either themselves have experienced online violence or harassment, or they know somebody who has, and that sort of makes them fearful. So from your point of view, and we've spoken about like what trust means and the role of government, etc. But what is your view in terms of what should be done to address the trust between different groups? First of all, do you believe that there is different trust? I mean, there's research that backs that up, but maybe your view would be of interest. And then also, you might have an opinion about what should be done to curb online gender-based violence and ensuring that we close the digital gender gap. I know it's a big question. Let's see what you've got to say to that.
Thank you so much for that question. I hope I'm audible. I think, you've actually asked me something that's so close to my heart, because I think if you look at the digital gender gap, and yes, the first part of your question was, is there some sort of difference? And I think there is. I think there is a difference between male access to the internet and female access to the internet, because a key barrier to women and girls' digital inclusion is having diminished access compared to men and boys. And this is also a cultural concern. And it includes access to devices, to data, to networks. And I think when you look at how the internet is perceived, it's perceived as a risk to the traditional order. And it's perceived as being unsafe for women and girls. And trying to think about solutions as to how online gender-based violence can be curbed. I think there's a whole stream of solutions that are out there. For instance, there ought to be targeted laws on online violence, and they have to be specific offenses, and these need to be prosecutable. And I think when you see enforcement of these laws, then you're going to see some sort of deepening of trust or greater building of trust by state entities, because there has to be a regulatory framework that's going to protect the rights of users online. And in particular, I'm looking at women and girls, considering the disparate access that often happens. And in addition to that, I think there have to be strategies where you look at how do you provide accessible information about what gender-based violence actually is. Because I think many users might not even fully appreciate that what they've been subjected to. Because once you're able to define this, and there are advocacy programs around what gender-based violence is, what are the possible remedies and support measures which have to exist. You can produce leaflets, work on social media campaigns. As a whole host of things. Youth centers and schools can address these issues, because literacy on these issues is key to being able to protect your rights. So I think from that vantage point, you look at awareness raising campaigns and policies that can address gender inequality and gender-based violence. And we really need to do a lot of hard work in that area, particularly in areas where this kind of information and access is limited, and also the cost of access is so high. So we need to have certain specialized mechanisms, and I believe state entities can partner with the private sector, make sure that we have trained and skilled personnel to eliminate online violence, fortify digital literacy programs in all languages, because you can't have, make sure that your literacy programs are accessible in terms of content, in terms of language, and make sure that there are regulatory authorities that have oversight over online gender-based violence, even if it's not their singular mandate, but there has to be some sort of regulatory body and regulatory mechanisms to deal with online violence. And I think in addition to that, we can look at some soft measures like ICT intermediaries who can invoke self-regulatory mechanisms, and they themselves can empower users to work through hotlines and awareness campaigns. Those are some of the issues that you can look at. I think normally you find in some communities there are male gatekeepers that control or restrict access to devices and the internet for many women and girls. And we see that because of the inequality in education, that's something we need to address. If we're going to look at how we address the gender digital divide, making sure that there's equality in education and that limitations in digital literacy are removed, and I think there also need to be digital products and services that are designed for women and girls. There has to be education on what is cyberbullying, what is doxing, what is cyberstalking or non-consensual pornography, trolling. These are the types of online gender-based violence that exist, and many people don't fully appreciate how they would be able to protect themselves if faced with this. So I think there have to be advocacy programs and definitely regulatory mechanisms. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basha, and I agree 100%. I also believe that the regulators should put a bit more pressure on the platform providers themselves and moderating gender-based violence online, which is currently not happening enough. Vicky, I know that the work that you guys are doing, which is fantastic, by the way, is capacity building amongst female entrepreneurs, for example, or small business owners, to enabling these women or sort of the female owners in not just securing their businesses, but also, empowering them to deal with all sorts of issues or online trust as well as online gender-based violence issues. Is there any, are there any plans in your strategies going forward to formalize this even more so, to possibly, like Vasha suggested, assist the South African or the sub-Saharan African governments to, make it part of regulation, make it part of our government structures to address this, to do more awareness drives or any other initiatives that you could share with us?
Sure, thank you, Anna. Perhaps if I just start with kind of explaining a little bit around the initiative that Anna was just referring to there. So when we were sort of designing our kind of capacity building interventions, we noticed that this was a really big problem, the kind of issues around digital inclusion and gender-based violence. So it's really front and center of all of our capacity building initiatives in Africa, making sure that we, by our interventions, aren't accidentally widening that digital divide or kind of making it a space where women aren't encouraged to kind of participate online. So this is where we came up with the idea for building a toolkit for small, medium and micro enterprises that are female owned. So what we did was we built this toolkit to make those organizations more sort of cyber resilient, also more data protection compliant, so they understood what their responsibilities were around data. But we didn't want to just give them a toolkit and walk away, but what we did was we had a kind of train the trainer program. So not only were these people taught, or these women taught how to use this toolkit, they were then taught how to kind of disseminate that information that they were learning kind of even further. So kind of trying to foster that community, that network of people who kind of are getting to understand the risks online so much better. I think in terms of your question, Anna, about are we trying to do anything more to to formalise that. It's a difficult one, right? Because we want to work within the boundaries of what governments are interested in doing, what their priorities are. But what we want to do is kind of point to this good capacity building work that we are doing and encouraging them to kind of take on the work that we've started and take it forward themselves. So with the Toolkit initiative that I mentioned, we're actually working with the Small Enterprise Development Agency in South Africa, and they are training up their incubator hub managers to roll this out to people who are accessing their services. So those people who are accessing their services to build their businesses. We also work with the Department for Communications and Digital Services to make sure that we are kind of highlighting the existence of this resource so that people can kind of get involved and get on board and really kind of help roll it from there. But I wonder if, Anna, I might say a little bit about just generally what the role of government is around kind of all of these issues. And I think, we've talked about legislation, and legislation is really important. It sets a direction for everybody in terms of kind of what is expected from them, what are the rules of the road. But I think alongside legislation has to be proper implementation plans so that legislation is effectively enforced, people understand what their responsibilities are, and I think a certain amount of awareness has to go alongside legislation. You can't just legislate and expect people to understand that they know what they're doing. And kind of this circles back round to how I ended up meeting Varsha and working with her when she was at the information regulator to build the toolkit around the data protection legislation in South Africa. There was a real need there now that they had the legislation to then inform people how to comply properly with that legislation. But I think I'll stop there, Anna, and let others speak.
Thank you. And I also believe that platforms like the event of today, or events like that, are there to share some of the good work that has been done in pockets, and hopefully that can be reused, obviously with more localized versions of it. But the toolkit, I know, is a fantastic resource that could probably be, with very little changes, could be reused in other regions. Confidence, I know, enabling and empowering girls, that is part of your mission. And you have so far, I think it's 4,000 girls that you've taken through the Cybersecurity Foundational Cyber Girls program, or the second cohort is busy with that. So I would like to know your point of view with regards to what more can be done in terms of empowering more women to be digitally included, but also be part of the cybersecurity skills gap issue. And then maybe you could also share with some of the audience members, like, what can influencers do, they're similar to yourself, like what can others do to help address this in their country, or even just in their organization or their small microcosmos?
Thank you so much, Anna. The work we do at CyberSafe has really opened my eyes up to seeing what the struggles of women are, not just from my perspective and my own experiences. That I'm seeing is stark different from girls in different parts of Nigeria or girls in different parts of Africa, where we have the honor of working in. We're currently training girls on one of our programs in 7 African countries, and we're training girls on another program which Anna is mentioning. We're now on 6,000 girls actually in Nigeria, and we can take from all of those samples of experiences and say very easily that girls and women are very at high risk online. Of many crimes, many cyber crimes. And I just remember while Anna was speaking how for our first cohort, one of our girls had gotten into the program, and the mother of the girl had been taking her out of those online things. Those online things is going to be this and that, And when the girl was going on crying about how she wanted to be part of this program, her mother joined the girl to the hub, to the physical training hub, for the first 2 weeks. Every day she was coming with her. And that's really reflective of trust issues that girls would have, because unlike boys, first you have issues with access to devices, the cost of these devices, cost of access to the internet in terms of data. You also have the issues around crimes that are online quickly snowballing into physical attacks. So we've had girls or women who have applied for jobs online and gone for those interviews and ended up late, very late, knowing that that was sort of a trap to kill them. There are girls that have had different experiences. I've said something online and a mob has killed them physically. So these are things that happen online, and you think, you would deal with them with just reporting or all of that things, but they quickly snowball into physical attacks. And so girls and women are generally more at risk of this kind of cybercrime naturalizing to physical harm. And I want to say that one of the key issues we have, just like Anna has said, is digital literacy in the first place. So you can't build on, you can't have a building without a foundation. That digital literacy has to be laid out. So women and girls know how to use digital responsibly and safely, and also know how to use the tools there as well that are provided for their safety. So most women don't know what to do if, for example, they were trolled online. They may not know what to do with that particular person. So we need that digital literacy and then build upon that with safe and responsible use of digital, not just for women, but generally for everyone. Because the other panelists have also spoken, a lot of people don't know how far-reaching their words are online. They can't put side by side their digital lives and their physical lives. So they feel like the digital lives are lesser. They don't realize that it's of equal weight. If you said, I'm going to kill you online, that's equal to you walking up at my door with a gun. That's the way I would receive it, because it does happen that way. So we need that education to happen, and we need it to not just happen as interventions, but institutionalized. So it needs to come into our curriculums. Why don't we have safe and responsible use of digital in our primary school curriculums? Because we're putting devices in the hands of boys and girls these days. We're having them do assignments online. We're having girls, do all of these things. Why aren't we protecting girls and women by providing general access to how people can use digital safely and institutionalizing it? We need to do that. And just to your last question, because I know I've spoken quite a lot, around how influencers can drive these kind of changes. I believe that we need to localize a lot of the awareness that we're building around cyber safety issues. Vinisha has spoken about many languages, awareness coming in many languages. There might also be cultural nuances that when people see their awareness drive, they're able to relate more to it, they're able to catch the message more. And I also want to charge us, or if you're in government or you're a key player in the ecosystem, I want us to really think about digital safety issues like we think about COVID and we think about Ebola. The kind of collaboration that has happened around messaging and driving awareness, we need that kind of collaboration for driving cyber safety issues, because this is, let's say, cyber crime is the Ebola or the COVID of the digital transformation that we actually really need for our economies. So we need that collaborative effort. We need that multi-stakeholder approach. We need government to drive all of that stakeholder coordination that needs to go into continuous messaging around building talent, around cybersecurity awareness, around online gender-based violence as it affects women as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Confidence. I love the passion that's coming out, even though it's virtually on my side. And I'd like to then ask Dr. Gatau again, because of your experience in government and having been exposed to multi-stakeholder, projects. What can private sector, or what can the organizations in industry do to best help or support government to address the issues, to create awareness, to build a safer digital world for our citizens? Like, what suggestions do you have that we can take away with, or that audience members can take away with, to best assist and support local governments?
Okay, thank you for that question. Of course, governments tend to focus on initiatives that are appropriate for government. For example, building infrastructure, working on policies and laws. But all of those take a long time and they require a lot of money. And therefore, all of us need to help the government, especially in those issues. I like what I think it's Benga and also Victoria who said that you give the orientation towards the citizen to also share knowledge, share experiences, and that is how most people will learn to protect themselves. Because before the law comes the norms of society, and we're still forming the norms in the digital realm. And that is why, you know, for example, and I'll just speak for Kenya, people are a lot nastier and ruder online than they would be if you meet them face to face, because somehow, I don't know, they don't feel responsibility for sending a really nasty message. It's somehow detached. Whereas when you have to face the human being to whom you're doing that, the same kind of thing, it's a lot more difficult and you feel a lot of embarrassment at the damage that you have done. So how is society going to form norms where people feel the pain of what they do and what they say and the kind of actions that they perpetrate online? And that is, I think, largely going to be done in the private sector and civil society. Currently, I'm assisting with FCDO, Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, UK-funded project for the Kenya ICT Action Network. And we are training farmers who are beginning to use the online space for e-commerce and to improve their incomes and their marketing. And we're teaching them what we're calling cyber hygiene, meaning how do they behave, how do they protect themselves while online. So we don't need to wait for the government to create the law. We can begin as individuals, as community groups, as the private sector to form the norms, to form the society that we want to build online, and to give the kind of information, the same way maybe you train your children or your brothers and sisters to cross the road, to have good manners when interacting with others. We don't wait for the government to teach our children good manners. We do it in the home from the day that they are born. And this is what has to happen. So the last point I'll make is that just like the mother who Confidence talked about, who accompanied her daughter, we need a more holistic approach. So if you are training persons with differently abled or disabled persons, train the caregiver. If you're training the child, create awareness in the parent also, because it's a whole of society approach. Nearly everyone is using this technology. So let's have programs that address the needs more broadly. I'll stop there because I know time's almost up, and I'm sure there are many other people who have something to say.
Thank you, Doctor. And in pockets, we're seeing that already. I know of organizations that are doing a lot in terms of external consumer awareness. In fact, addressing the parents is actually something that one of our local medical aids called Discovery Health, they've ran a whole digital literacy program addressed at parents to help their children. I also believe that critical thinking and security awareness should be part of our curriculum from primary school level all the way up. But that's maybe Varsha, from your point of view, is there anything that you would like to share in terms of what we can do to collaboratively address the issue and work together? Yes, I know a lot, like creating legislation, laws, as we've heard, takes a long time, but there are other ways that we can possibly assist or help government speed up the process.
No, I'd love to weigh in on that. And I think collaboration is something that has to happen because, you can't rely on the state alone. You need to look, I think there have to be programs where where digital literacy is fostered. I mean, there's, if you look at some of the digital literacy programs in Singapore, for instance, you'd have something as where you'd get teenagers which would assist the elderly in trying to empower them as to how they should use their devices. And there are massive digital literacy programs for every age group. So I think when we're looking at collaboration in terms of digital literacy, it's definitely one of the very key mechanisms that we can look at. And I think we must not underplay the role that civil society can play in fostering digital literacy projects, because you normally find that community leaders and civil society, they're often on the outside of digital interventions, but they can play a very critical role in raising awareness on issues such as privacy and digital security. And you will find that more often than not, digital technologies in the global north, and these technologies would be deployed in the global south. So that might also give rise to some sort of algorithmic bias. And I think what I'm saying is that there should be co-design of these technologies where you involve civil society to collaborate on technology, so that the co-design mechanism can definitely address disassociated technology. So it incorporates all actors in the ecosystem. And that's what I'd like to start seeing, a very holistic view. And I think the good thing about civil society as well is that they adopt a very bottom-up approach. So I don't think I think they have a meaningful role to play. I think the private sector have a meaningful role to play as well, even in their corporate social responsibility programs. And if you look at joining hands and raising awareness, it's definitely the way to go, particularly if we look at the prevalence of cyber threats and for people to understand how do they actually protect themselves against this. And I think that level of awareness is a huge gap there. Thank you.
Thank you, Varsha. So collaboration is really the key word, I think, of the panel. Benga, we only have 2 minutes left. Could you share your parting thoughts with the panel and the audience? What are your thoughts in terms of getting this collaborative approach and raising awareness? How can we do that together?
Representation matters. We struggled on some of our early programs to get more women to participate, but once we put a woman in front of the class, things changed. And I think representation matters not just as a tokenistic act, but where it comes from a place of actually, fundamental design. I'll give an example. When we, not just in terms of the training, but so we did a cyber security training and sort of gamified it, something that Pride Initiative and Policy did. And it was a story of 3 girls, Aisha and some other girls. And we realized that a lot of people who are tweeting and are sharing this information are actually people who would not normally want to engage with that kind of content, but they can see themselves in it. But apart from representation, I think it's also language. I think, we've all talked about that today. We can't deceive ourselves and think that, you have it in English and in French, that's fine. We've translated materials into Swahili, just recently into Akan, and that has sort of opened up a new community of engagement entirely. It's also important to celebrate best practices, and I know that when we talk about cybersecurity, it's more often than not we talk about the things that have gone wrong. It would be great to talk about the things that have also gone right, to give examples. So the example that you gave in terms of your training, I think it's something that people can easily relate with and also borrow. But closing word is communication. I think we talk to ourselves like geeks, and many people don't understand what we're saying. We need to translate what we're saying. When we say cybersecurity or anything that we say, the perfect example that I gave is that for 6 years we produced a regional report on digital rights in Africa, and I don't think 500,000 people read all of the reports. Then we produced a movie. And in less than 12 months, 4.8 million hits, compared with 6 years of 500,000. We need to break down the language, break the jargon, and take the message to where the people are.
Thank you so much. Those are fantastic closing words. I think we're right on the hour. I'd like to thank every one of you again. Your input was extremely valuable. I learned a lot. Thank you for having me. The takeaway for me is really that collaboration is the key. We can't rely on the state alone. In fact, if we in industry don't have enough skills, how can we look at government and expect them to have all the answers? So we need to work together, learn from other regions. I really like the example that that Varsha gave from Singapore, where you employ teenagers to train elders. Using communication that talks to the audience group. All of those are good insights and tips that we can take away from this today. And I hope we can take the discussion further. Please do reach out to the panelists on social media. Most of them are on Twitter or on LinkedIn. I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn myself too. And I look forward to any further comments and questions. Thank you so much.
Do we have any questions in the room? Yes, let me run over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Victoria. It's an excellent panel. Really, the discussion on multi-stakeholder participation has been on since WSIS 2003, 2005. So it's a good thing we're echoing again. So I'm from the private sector. We all have responsibility. And we need to, as Benga said, communication. We need to continue to communicate this. So trust is indeed very essential, as we have said. But can we really have 100% trust? Is it possible to have 100% trust? We can see breakages or where it's failed. That's number one. And number two, what is the relationship, between, say, trust and development? Trust on the cyber space and development. Is there a relationship? Has there been any check on? Are we making progress, or we are retarding, or we are retrogressing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. So my response to that would be that there's nothing like 100% absolute trust. However, trust should be as healthy as it can be. So when you're buying a service or you're subscribing to a service, availability will be about ideally 5 nines, so 99.999. So that would sort of be like the ideal gold standard for trust, if I was to put it that way. The key thing is not to progressively work on the trust to grow, because the question you've asked is one I would just use to answer your first question, which is that as trust increases, the chances for the business, I'm talking as private sector person here, chances for the business to also grow in terms of its revenue is directly seen. And when trust drops as well, the business would also lose. Let me give you one instance where cyber issues could lead to trust issues that lead to erosion of trust and then, of course, loss of revenue. If there's a cyber attack, for example, and it's proven maybe in court that there was negligence, let's say the Equilux issue, you understand, and there is proof that somebody did not do what they were supposed to do, and that was what led to the cyber attack. So people could lose their jobs, share prices could go lower, they could lose customers, so that's a direct correlation. However, I would also want to add that with development per se, like Benga has said, some services are consumed because we just need it, while some services are growing rapidly because, of course, trust quotient is very high. Case in point is M-Pesa. I was recently in Kenya, and I also wondered about how much they're using the service. It's also because trust levels are very high. So I think that we should leverage trust and see trust as a pillar for business growth in the digital economy. That way, we are continuously growing that trust in our communication, in our investment in cybersecurity, because again, it's not lip service we have to pay, in how we're managing our stakeholders when there's a cyber crisis or there's a cyber incident. We find that most times organizations default to a default to, saying there's no cyber attack, nothing has happened, denying it, as against having a proper incident management plan that details how each person is going to communicate and how you're going to manage the stakeholders, because there'll be proof, for example, in some cases that cyber attack has happened, So it's in managing all of those that, ensures that the trust quotient is protected, the business is protected, and you continuously work on it as you would work on excellence generally.
Maybe, I'll just add in terms of development, you can't have development without cooperation. And when trust is not in the room, what you have is pretense, not real cooperation. So even if you pretend to work together, which we've seen in many African countries, if you form committees, people pretend to work, they create something, and then there's a change in government, and that's it. And that's a complete reversal. Trust has to be there for true development to happen.
I think a really important part of this as well is being transparent, whether you're a government organization or a business organization, is the more you can publish about what your roles and responsibilities are to your consumers, to your citizens, and what accountability you're going to hold yourselves to, I think that can really help foster trust as well. And for people to understand what it means by when they kind of comply with data protection law. What does it actually mean for the person that's interacting with that service? And the more transparent you can be, and the kind of less use of jargon, I think that really helps people build digital trust. So when Confidence was saying, organizations denying that a cyber attack has even happened when it is quite clearly obvious, that does nothing to really help build digital trust. But what I think people can empathize with is people owning up to an issue, explaining what it is that they're doing about it, and what it is that they're going to do in the future to prevent that from happening. So that kind of culture of transparency, I think, is really important to foster trust.
Okay, elders have a bad habit of trying to have the last word. Yes, I agree with Benga, no development without trust. If you look at Africa, the number of elections we in Kenya repeat, but also the violence that sometimes occurs, that means people don't trust in the process, and a process which is not trusted will definitely retard development. What is the solution? Well, what has been said by everybody else. We need to recognize that the digital economy is a trust economy, and we need to actively build trust, and also punish or discipline those who are eroding trust. So it's not just enough to create awareness and training and education. We must also have policy and legal and etc. environments where people who act in an untrustworthy way face the consequences, because you cannot measure the impact, the long-term impact of those untrustworthy habits or actions. Yeah, it's huge in terms of development.
Anna, I'm not sure if you're still online, and if you can see if there are any online questions. She may have already left
I'm still
us.
here. I'm
Great.
still here. There are just two comments from the online audience, no questions. I'll just read out the comments because I think they're really good. Ayanda says, I like the idea of corporate responsibility that extends to digital skills development. That's a good one. I think that's maybe a good takeaway. And then Kennedy said, collaboration really is the key. We need a multi-stakeholder approach where we have government, private sector, and civil society working together. And I think that sums up the discussions really nicely. I don't know if there are any more questions from the audience here in Lilongwe, Vicky, that you want to take?
Yes, one here.
Thank you. Mine is not a question, but a comment, and just to really add on to what the panelists have already expressed in terms of the significance and the importance of cooperation. My name is David Mwepe and I'm from Botswana. I run a program called Cyber Smart Botswana, which is a cybersecurity awareness program, and it's a collaborative effort between civil society, government, as well as international development partners. We are increasingly looking for opportunities to roll out the program in collaboration with local players in other countries. Confidence, we have been in touch, and we're still talking. Victoria, we have been in touch, and we're talking in terms of how best we can really ensure that we promote cybersecurity awareness collaboratively, because I don't think any one entity or one sector can achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I think I remember seeing your name pop up on our side as well, so I'll reach out to you to see how we can assist. Okay, if there are no further questions in the physical audience, there's nothing from the virtual audience. I think we can conclude the session, and thank you again so much, the esteemed panelists and the audience as well. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your interest, both virtually and in person, and yeah, please take the discussion further. This is not the end of it, this is just the beginning, and have a wonderful rest of your event. Thank you so much.